The mother did not deny it. She stood in the center of Judge Caprio's courtroom with dried blood still visible beneath one thumbnail, lifted her chin through the trembling and said, "Yes, I broke the glass. And if my daughter stopped breathing again, I would break it again." The room recoiled as if the words themselves had shattered something. A few people gasped. The pharmacy executive at the plaintiff's table let out a disgusted little laugh. Then Judge Caprio looked up over his glasses, and the expression on his face changed so quietly, so completely, that everyone in that courtroom felt it at the same time. This was not going to be a routine theft case. This was about to become something else. The fluorescent lights turned every surface hard and unforgiving. The polished wood, the brass rail, the sharp white collar of the woman pressing charges, the faded diner uniform peeking out beneath the defendant's coat. If you're the kind of person who still believes the law should remember what a heartbeat is worth, stay with this one, because before it was over, people in that room would want to leave their outrage in the comments, hit like out of pure disbelief, and send the story to anyone who still thinks justice and mercy can't sit on the same bench. Her name was Marisol Vega, 32 years old, widow, night shift waitress, mother of a 7-year-old girl named Lucia, who had a severe peanut allergy and lungs that turned betrayal into emergency in under a minute. Marisol stood in cheap black flats worn down at the heel, a brown coat too thin for the season, and a uniform blouse that still carried the faint smell of fryer grease and coffee. Her dark hair had been twisted into a hurried knot at the back of her head, and her hands told the whole story before she opened her mouth. Small cuts, burned knuckles, and the nervous habit of pressing her thumb against the edge of her palm, as if pain were easier to manage when self-inflicted. But she stood straight, not polished, not rehearsed, dignified in the way people become when life has stripped them of comfort and left them only truth. Across from her sat Veronica Hale, regional president of Wellbridge Pharmacy Group, the kind of woman who had never once been mistaken for powerless. She wore an ivory suit that looked expensive enough to insult people on its own, pearl earrings, and a cold red lipstick that matched the folder in front of her. Her hair was cut into a sleek, blunt line that never moved. Even the way she crossed her legs suggested rules existed to protect her, not bind her. She had insisted on attending in person, not because the loss mattered financially. A broken emergency cabinet and one missing EpiPen would have meant nothing to her balance sheet, but because, as she told reporters outside, principle matters. On paper, the case did look simple. Marisol was charged with criminal damage, theft of prescription medication, and disorderly conduct after smashing the locked emergency medicine cabinet at a Wellbridge location and taking an EpiPen injector without payment. Security footage showed her forcing the glass with a metal stanchion from the checkout line. Employees said she was hysterical. Veronica Hale's attorney described it as a dangerous precedent of emotional vigilantism. Judge Caprio glanced down at the file, then up at Marisol. "Mrs. Vega," he asked softly, "why did you do it?" Marisol swallowed. Her voice came out rough. "Because my daughter's lips were turning blue, Your Honor." The courtroom went silent. Not the ordinary silence of attention, the dead, heavy silence that descends when one sentence pulls the moral center out of a case and lays it on the table where nobody can avoid it. Veronica Hale shifted only enough to make her bracelet catch the light. "With respect, Your Honor, panic does not excuse burglary. If every emotional parent can decide property laws are optional, society stops functioning." A murmur passed through the gallery. Judge Caprio did not respond right away. He only looked at her with that still, devastating patience of a man who has heard arrogance so often he can identify it by sound before meaning even arrives. Marisol testified first. She had finished a double shift and picked Lucia up from the neighbor who watched her at night. On the walk home, Lucia bit into a cookie given out at the diner and collapsed coughing in the alley behind the pharmacy strip. Marisol's emergency injector had expired 2 weeks earlier. The replacement had been prescribed, she said, but she had not yet filled it because the copay had jumped to more than $300 after a change in coverage. She ran into Wellbridge carrying Lucia in one arm and the prescription in the other. She begged. She showed the script. She said she would sign anything, bring anything, come back with anything. She said Lucia was wheezing so hard it sounded like paper tearing. Veronica's attorney rose and smoothed his tie. And yet instead of calling emergency services, you committed a crime. Marisol turned toward the bench, not toward him. I called. They said the ambulance was 12 minutes away. Then she said the line that changed the energy of the room. My daughter didn't have 12 minutes. That's when everything changed. Her public defender moved to admit the store's surveillance footage with full audio, footage Wellbridge had resisted producing until that very morning. Judge Caprio allowed it. On the screen, grainy but brutally clear, Marisol burst through the automatic doors with Lucia limp against her shoulder, her child's face already puffy and mottled. She stumbled to the counter, crying, "Please, please, she can't breathe." A young pharmacy tech froze. A pharmacist looked toward the back office. Then came Veronica Hale's regional protocol supervisor on speakerphone through the counter tablet, tinny and emotionless. No release without payment authorization. No emergency override without on-duty prescriber approval. Document refusal. A woman in the gallery covered her mouth. The footage continued. Marisol kept begging. She held up the valid prescription. She tried her card. It declined. She tried again. Declined again. Lucia slid halfway out of her arms and hit the tile on her knees, gasping. Someone behind the counter said, "Call 911 again." Marisol shouted, "She's dying now." Then one sentence from off-screen changed the temperature of the whole room. "If she can't pay," a voice said, calm as ice, "she can wait like everyone else." The courtroom went dead silent. Veronica Hale's attorney objected immediately, but the damage had already landed. Judge Caprio leaned slightly forward. Whose voice was that? The defense called the store manager, pale, sweating, unwilling. Under oath, he admitted the voice belonged to Veronica Hale, who had been touring the location before a shareholder event and had inserted herself into the incident by video link from the back office. Hale's face remained composed, but a stiffness had crept into her jaw now. Then came the second twist. The defense produced internal messages recovered after subpoena from the company's regional emergency inventory system. Wellbridge stores, it turned out, kept a small number of donated backup injectors from a manufacturer relief program for uninsured pediatric emergencies. One store chat message from a pharmacist asked for permission to use one for child in active distress. The reply from Veronica Hale's corporate account read, "Absolutely not. We are not a charity dispensary. If you cave once, every sob story becomes inventory loss." A gasp broke out so sharply the bailiff had to call for order. Veronica finally snapped, "This is exactly why businesses fail in cities like this. People like her always come in with tears and expect rules to disappear." The courtroom went silent again, deeper than before. Judge Caprio looked at her. People like her. Veronica lifted one shoulder. Desperate people who make their chaos everyone else's responsibility. At the mention of chaos, Marisol's composure finally trembled. But she did not cry. She reached into her coat and pulled out Lucia's school photograph, the edges soft from being carried too often. "That is who I made your responsibility for 3 minutes," she said. The defense called the paramedic next. He testified that when his team arrived, Lucia was in full anaphylaxis, oxygen crashing, airway swelling, and Marisol had already administered the stolen injector in the parking lot after breaking the cabinet. If she hadn't, he said plainly, the child likely would not have survived transport. No one in the courtroom moved. Then came the final blow. A former Wellbridge compliance officer, subpoenaed after resignation, testified that Hale had personally ordered the emergency override button disabled in several stores because staff were too emotional and the company needed discipline around compassion leakage. He produced a memo. It was real. Signed. Dated. Cold. In it, Hale warned managers not to let sentimental exceptions undermine premium customer standards. By now, even Hale's own attorney looked ill. Judge Caprio removed his glasses and set them on the bench. When he spoke, his voice was low, calm, and lethal. "Mrs. Hale, you came into this courtroom expecting a theft case. You expected a poor mother with a declined card to look reckless and a corporate executive with a compliance memo to look responsible. But what the evidence shows is far uglier. A child was dying in front of licensed adults. A valid prescription existed. Emergency stock existed. Mercy was available. And the only thing standing between that child and survival was your devotion to policy when policy became cruelty. Veronica tried one last defense. I cannot run a business on feelings. No, Caprio said, the word landing like a hammer. But you also cannot run it on cowardice and call it order. The courtroom went dead silent. Then came the one-liner people in that room would repeat for years. When the law protects property but forgets a child's breath, the law needs a judge, not a cashier. A shudder of emotion moved through the benches. Caprio's monologue did not rise in volume, but it deepened in force. He spoke of mothers forced into impossible decisions by systems designed to monetize delay. He spoke of how often powerful institutions hide behind procedure after weaponizing it against the desperate. He spoke of Marisol Vega not as a criminal, but as a parent who did what time demanded when bureaucracy chose to hesitate. You did not save order, Mrs. Hale, he told Veronica. You endangered a child and then tried to prosecute the woman who refused to let your paperwork bury her daughter. He paused, then delivered the final dismantling. Compassion is not a rounding error, and a mother in mortal fear is not your public relations problem. The verdict felt less like a ruling than a moral correction. Judge Caprio dismissed every charge against Marisol Vega in the interest of necessity and justice. He ordered the immediate return of her seized property, referred Wellbridge Pharmacy Group for state review of emergency medication practices, and directed the clerk to transmit the evidence to the licensing board and Attorney General's office. Then he turned to Marisol, and for the first time his voice softened. Mrs. Vega, you broke glass to save a life. This court will not confuse that with criminal intent. Marisol covered her face and finally broke. Not loudly, just one sharp breath, then another, then tears that looked less like collapse than release. In the second row, Lucia, small, alive, wearing a borrowed cardigan and clutching a stuffed rabbit, began crying too, and a court officer quietly brought her to her mother before anyone could object. Veronica Hale sat motionless, her expensive posture shattered by the simple fact that the room no longer saw authority when it looked at her. It saw emptiness. In the weeks that followed, the story spread. Wellbridge faced investigations. Emergency override policies were restored statewide and several chains under public pressure, and 2 former employees came forward with nearly identical stories. Lucia got her medication through a community program funded by donations that flooded in after the hearing. Marisol kept working, but not alone anymore. Neighbors checked in. Parents at Lucia's school started a medical emergency fund. Justice had not erased their struggle, but it had done something rare and holy. It had made their suffering visible and their courage undeniable. If this story hit you where it hurts, tell me in the comments the exact moment you knew Judge Caprio had seen through the whole thing. And if you believe the law matters most when it remembers what human life is worth, like, subscribe, and share this with someone who still believes that sometimes the bravest person in a courtroom is the one who broke the rule that should never have mattered more than a child's next breath.